Robert sat across from Trump in the Oval Office, the grandeur of the room amplifying the gravity of the moment. Trump leaned back in his chair, hands steepled as he studied the man before him. "Bobby," Trump said, his voice a mixture of authority and camaraderie, "this country doesn't need a politician in this role. It needs a disruptor, someone who isn't afraid to challenge the system." Robert smirked, a glint of amusement in his sharp blue eyes. "A disruptor? I've been called worse." Trump chuckled. "Exactly. That's why you're perfect for this. The Kennedy name still carries weight, but you've made a name for yourself by not playing by the rules. This is bigger than politics, Bobby. This is about legacy. Yours and mine." The words struck a chord. Legacy. It was a concept Robert had grappled with his entire life, the burden of being a Kennedy shaping his every move. Yet, for the first time, the weight of that legacy felt like an opportunity rather than a curse. "I'll do it," he said finally, his voice steady. Trump's grin widened, his satisfaction evident. But there was something else in his expression, something Robert couldn't quite place: anticipation, or perhaps relief. The swearing-in ceremony was small and private, held later that week in the Oval Office. As Robert placed his hand on the Bible, repeating the words of the oath, an unfamiliar sensation washed over him. It wasn't pride or even trepidation. It was something colder, darker. The air in the room seemed heavier, the light dimmer. For a moment, he thought he saw a shadow move along the wall, independent of the people in the room. When the ceremony ended, Trump leaned in close, his voice low enough for only Robert to hear. "Welcome to the team," he said, his tone carrying an edge of something unspoken. "Now, it's time for you to learn how things really work." Robert didn't respond, but the words lingered in his mind as he left the room. He was no stranger to the games of power, but this felt different. This felt like a game with rules he didn't yet understand. Later that evening, Robert found himself alone in his new office at the Department of Health and Human Services. The room was sleek and modern, but it lacked warmth, its sterile decor a reflection of the institution's purpose. On his desk was a black folder marked with the presidential seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper with the words, "Period." "The pact is our foundation. Your role is to preserve it." Robert leaned back in his chair, the words swirling in his mind. The phrasing was cryptic, but its meaning was clear. His position was not just about policy or public service. It was about something deeper, something far more consequential. He closed the folder and looked out the window at the city lights. For the first time in years, he felt a spark of exhilaration, a sense that he was stepping into a role that would not only define his legacy, but elevate it beyond anything his family had achieved. Whatever this pact was, he would not just preserve it, he would strengthen it. The next morning, Robert arrived at the Department of Health and Human Services earlier than expected. His mind was still fixed on the cryptic message from the black folder. "The pact is our foundation. Your role is to preserve it." The words had awakened something in him, not fear, but intrigue. He knew power often came cloaked in secrecy, but this felt like more than just politics. This felt ancient. His day unfolded like any other first day on the job. Briefings, handshakes, and introductions. Yet, beneath the veneer of normalcy, Robert felt an undercurrent of something unspoken, a tension that seemed to ripple through the air. His staff seemed polite but wary, as if they were in on a secret he wasn't yet privy to. It wasn't until late afternoon that he found his first clue. After wrapping up a meeting on public health policies, an aide approached him with a stack of documents. "These are for your review, Secretary Kennedy," she said, placing them on his desk. As she turned to leave, she hesitated, then glanced back. "There's also another document. It's in the archive room. It's marked for your eyes only." Robert raised an eyebrow. "What's in it?" "I'm not authorized to say," she replied, her tone clipped. but it's tradition for new secretaries to review it. It's in section 47. I've arranged access for you." Intrigued, Robert decided to investigate immediately. The archive room was tucked away in the basement of the building, a labyrinth of metal shelves and dim, flickering lights. It smelled of dust and decay, as though time itself had settled into the walls. He found section 47 at the very back of the room. A heavy steel door barred his way, its surface etched with faint markings that looked almost like symbols. He entered the code the aide had given him, and the door clicked open, revealing a single table illuminated by a bare bulb. On the table sat a leather-bound book, its cover embossed with the same symbol from the door. Robert approached cautiously, his heart pounding in his chest. He opened the book, revealing pages filled with dense, handwritten text and strange diagrams. The title on the first page read, "The Pact, Origins and Preservation." The next page detailed the origins of the agreement. It described how, centuries ago, a secret council of leaders had struck a deal with a powerful entity known only as the Benefactor. In exchange for prosperity and global dominance, the leaders pledged obedience to the Benefactor's will, ensuring that certain events, wars, pandemics, and breakthroughs unfolded according to its design. The United States had inherited the mantle of the Pact after World War II, becoming the central force in maintaining the Benefactor's balance. Robert's eyes scanned the pages, each word deepening his understanding of the enormity of the Pact. It wasn't just a secret. It was the foundation of modern civilization. Wars had been waged, economies built, and nations dismantled, all according to the Benefactor's plan. Near the end of the book, a passage caught his attention. The Secretary of Health serves as the steward of life and balance, ensuring compliance with the Benefactor's directives. The price of failure is collapse. The reward for obedience is eternal supremacy. Robert closed the book, his hands trembling slightly. His mind raced with possibilities. This was the key to everything: control, power, legacy. The Kennedy name had always been associated with ambition, and now he had the opportunity to elevate it to heights his family had only dreamed of. When he returned to his office, he found another envelope waiting for him. Inside was a single note, period. "You have seen the truth. Now it is time to act. Your decisions will shape the future. Do not disappoint." Robert leaned back in his chair, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. For years, he had been branded as a disruptor, a man unafraid to challenge convention. Now he saw his path clearly. This wasn't a role for hesitation or doubt. The Pact was not something to be questioned or dismantled. It was a tool, one that he could wield to shape the world. He placed the note back on his desk and stared out the window at the Washington skyline. The city, the nation, the world, they were all pieces on a board, and he had just been handed the game's most powerful rulebook. A smile tugged at the corner of his lips. "Let's see how far we can take this," he murmured to himself. Robert's transformation into the steward of the Pact was swift and deliberate. He immersed himself in his new role, studying the intricate web of influence the Benefactor had woven over decades. The documents he uncovered in the archives revealed how pandemics had been used to consolidate power, how breakthroughs in medicine were selectively distributed to maintain global hierarchies, and how chaos in one corner of the world often ensured stability elsewhere. Far from being horrified, Robert was invigorated. The Pact wasn't a burden, it was an opportunity. While others before him had treated their role with caution, he saw the potential to elevate the United States to an unassailable position. The Benefactor wasn't just a tool, it was an ally. One evening, he convened a private meeting in an underground chamber beneath the Department of Health. The room, stark and utilitarian, was illuminated by a single overhead light that cast sharp shadows on the faces of the gathered officials. These were the heads of the consortium, a select group of advisors who had served as the Pact's guardians for generations. Robert stood at the head of the table, his presence commanding. "For too long," he began, "we've followed the benefactor's will passively. We've maintained the balance, ensured stability, and upheld the pact. But we've also limited ourselves." The room fell silent. The consortium members exchanged uneasy glances, their faces betraying a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "The world is changing," Robert continued. "Technology is advancing faster than ever, and with it comes the potential for unprecedented control. Imagine a world where health, surveillance, and governance are intertwined, where the United States doesn't just maintain balance, we dictate it." One of the members, a grizzled man with decades of experience, cleared his throat. "Mr. Secretary, the benefactor has always been clear. The pact is about preservation, not expansion. Overreach could destabilize everything." Robert leaned forward, his eyes sharp and unyielding. "Preservation is no longer enough. The benefactor demands obedience, but it also rewards ambition. If we demonstrate our willingness to push its influence further, to amplify its vision, we won't just preserve the pact, we'll redefine it." The room was quiet for a moment before another voice, this one softer but no less resolute, spoke up. "And what exactly do you propose?" In the weeks that followed, Robert unveiled his plan. The Global Directive. It was a sweeping initiative that would integrate health policies with cutting-edge surveillance technologies. Under the guise of pandemic preparedness, the United States would roll out a global network of biometric monitoring systems. These systems, embedded in everyday healthcare infrastructure, would collect vast amounts of data, ostensibly to improve health outcomes, but in reality, to consolidate power. The benefactor's influence would be the unseen hand guiding the directive. Through predictive algorithms and targeted interventions, the United States would ensure that every nation fell in line. Resistance would be met with selective disruptions, withheld treatments, manufactured crises, and the slow erosion of dissent. Late one night, Robert stood alone in his office, reviewing the final details of the directive. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the city outside. The whispers had returned, but now they felt different, not oppressive, but affirming. They no longer felt like a warning. They felt like approval. As he signed the final document, the room grew colder. The lights dimmed, and the shadows on the walls seemed to ripple. He looked up to see the benefactor's form materializing before him, its glowing eyes piercing the darkness. "You have exceeded expectations," the entity said, its voice resonating with an unnatural depth. "You understand what others could not. The pact is not merely a chain. It is a weapon." Robert met the benefactor's gaze, unflinching. "The pact is ours to wield. The world will follow." The entity tilted its head, its shadowy form shifting as if in amusement. "You have ambition, Kennedy. Ambition is rewarded. But remember, power is a double-edged sword." Robert nodded. "I've spent my life walking on the edge of the blade. This time, I intend to wield it." The directive was launched with great fanfare, framed as a monumental step forward in global health. Nations lined up to participate, drawn by promises of cutting-edge technology and access to resources they desperately needed. Behind the scenes, the consortium worked tirelessly to ensure the benefactor's influence seeped into every corner of the initiative. Within months, the United States had achieved an unprecedented level of control. Data flowed freely into the system, giving the consortium the ability to predict and manipulate events with surgical precision. Public health became the perfect facade for global dominance. Robert watched it all unfold with a sense of triumph. He had not only embraced the pact, he had transformed it. The Kennedy name, once synonymous with tragedy, was now a symbol of power. One evening, as he stood on the balcony of his residence, overlooking the city, the whispers returned. But this time, they weren't alone. The benefactor's voice joined them, a low, resonant hum that filled his mind. "You have secured the balance," it said. "You have ensured the legacy, but the work is never done." Robert smiled, the city lights reflecting in his sharp blue eyes. "Then let's get to work." The global directive had rolled out smoothly, or so it seemed. Nations praised the program as a revolutionary step in global health management, a testament to American ingenuity. Behind closed doors, however, cracks were beginning to form. A small coalition of countries, led by an ambitious European leader, began raising concerns about the data collected by the system. They accused the United States of overreach, alleging that the biometric network was being used for surveillance far beyond public health. The accusations gained traction, sparking protests in major cities across the world. Public trust in the directive began to waver, and media outlets pounced on the opportunity to expose what they called America's hidden agenda. For Robert, this wasn't a crisis, it was an opportunity. At a late-night consortium meeting, Robert stood at the head of the table, his presence commanding as usual. "They're playing right into our hands," he said, his voice calm but edged with determination. "This resistance is exactly what we need." One of the members frowned, clearly unsettled. "Mr. Secretary, if we're exposed, if the benefactor's work is revealed, it could unravel everything. The pact is based on secrecy." Robert leaned forward, his piercing gaze sweeping the room. "Secrecy is a tool, not a necessity. The benefactor rewards boldness. If they want to question our motives, let them. But we won't defend ourselves with words. We'll defend ourselves with action." Another member hesitated. "What kind of action?" Robert smiled, a cold, calculating expression. "A demonstration." The demonstration was swift and precise. In one of the dissenting nations, a sudden outbreak of an aggressive virus spread through its population. The health system, already strained, buckled under the pressure. Within days, the country was in chaos, and its leaders were forced to beg the United States for assistance. Robert's team responded immediately. A shipment of antiviral treatments, previously withheld under the directive's protocols, was dispatched. The results were dramatic. The outbreak was contained, and the dissenting nation issued a public statement of gratitude to the United States. The message was clear. Compliance ensured survival. Resistance invited ruin. In the aftermath, Robert stood in the Oval Office with President Trump, briefing him on the situation. Trump, ever pragmatic, chuckled as he reviewed the reports. "You're good at this, Bobby. Remind me why you weren't in politics sooner." Robert smirked. "Some things are better controlled from the shadows." Trump leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "So, what's next?" Robert's tone shifted, becoming colder. "We tighten our grip. We've shown the world what happens when they resist. Now we make sure they don't get the chance to question us again." That evening, as Robert returned to his office, the whispers greeted him like old friends. The benefactor's voice soon followed, resonating with approval. "You have proven your worth," it said, its tone carrying a weight that made the air feel heavier. "Your actions have ensured the pact's survival, but survival is only the beginning." Robert nodded, his mind already racing with possibilities. "The directive is working, but it's not enough. We need something bigger, something that guarantees our control for generations." The benefactor's glowing eyes seemed to narrow, as if studying him. "And what do you propose?" "A new foundation," Robert said, his voice firm. "We integrate the directive with every aspect of society: education, economics, defense, every system, every decision tied to the pact. The world won't just follow us, they'll depend on us. The shadows around the benefactor rippled, and its voice carried a note of satisfaction. Ambition suits you, Kennedy. Proceed. Within weeks, Robert unveiled the next phase of the directive. Branded as the Foundation Initiative, it expanded the directive's reach into global infrastructure, creating a seamless integration of data, policy, and governance. Countries that had once hesitated now found themselves unable to function without American support. Trade routes were optimized, educational systems revamped, and defense networks fortified, all under the guise of progress. As the initiative took hold, dissent faded. The few voices that spoke out were swiftly silenced, either by economic pressure or unfortunate accidents. The world began to settle into a new equilibrium, one where the United States was not just a superpower, it was the singular power. One evening, as Robert reviewed the progress reports from his residence, the whispers grew louder. The benefactor appeared before him, its form larger and more imposing than ever. "You have surpassed all who came before you," it said. "The pact is no longer a burden. It is your creation. But remember, Kennedy, your ambition binds you to me." Robert stood, meeting the entity's gaze without flinching. "I don't fear the bond. I embrace it. The world is ours now." The benefactor's laughter echoed through the room, a sound that reverberated deep into Robert's soul. "Then you are ready for what comes next." The benefactor's words echoed in Robert's mind. You are ready for what comes next. He had reshaped the pact, turned it into a global instrument of control, and ensured that the United States stood unchallenged. But the whispers were growing louder, their meaning clearer with each passing night. His role wasn't complete, not yet. In the weeks following the success of the Foundation Initiative, Robert began to uncover fragments of knowledge buried deep within the consortium's archives. These weren't mere documents. They were ancient texts, symbols, and rites passed down through centuries. At the center of it all was a ritual, the final step for those who wished to transcend the confines of mortality and bind themselves irrevocably to the pact. Late one evening, in the depths of the Department of Health, Robert stood in the chamber where it all began, Section 47. This time, the room had been prepared for something far greater. The map of the world had been replaced by a vast circular insignia carved into the stone floor, its lines glowing faintly with an otherworldly light. Candles flickered along the edges, casting long shadows that danced like living entities. The members of the consortium stood in a silent circle, their expressions a mixture of reverence and fear. At the center of the room stood a single pedestal, and upon it, the ring, an artifact that Robert now understood was far more than ceremonial. It was the anchor of the pact, a conduit through which the benefactor's will flowed. Robert stepped forward, his presence commanding as ever. He picked up the ring, its cold weight familiar in his hand. As he held it, the whispers grew deafening, and the room seemed to tilt, as though reality itself were bending under the force of what was about to happen. "Tonight," Robert began, his voice steady and resolute, "we ensure that the pact does not merely survive, it thrives. We secure not just the balance but the dominance of the United States, and through this ritual, I will carry the pact's power into eternity." The members of the consortium lowered their heads, murmuring a prayer in the language of the pact. The air grew colder, the glow of the insignia intensifying. As Robert placed the ring on his finger, the benefactor appeared in a swirl of shadows, its towering form filling the chamber. The consortium fell to their knees, but Robert stood tall, his gaze locked with the entity's glowing eyes. "You have embraced the pact," the benefactor said, its voice resonating through the walls. "But ambition demands sacrifice. Are you prepared to give what is required?" Robert nodded, his expression unyielding. I've given everything. Take whatever remains. The benefactor extended its skeletal hand, motioning for Robert to step into the center of the insignia. As he did, the glowing lines flared and the room was engulfed in blinding light. The voices of the consortium faded, replaced by the roar of wind and the deep hum of something far older than time itself. Robert felt the ring tighten on his finger, its metal growing searing hot. Pain coursed through his body, but he didn't flinch. He welcomed it, knowing that this was the price of greatness. The benefactor leaned closer, its shadowy face mere inches from Robert's. Through this bond, you will transcend mortality. You will become the eternal steward, the heir to the Pack's power. But know this, your soul is no longer your own. It belongs to me. I don't care about my soul, Robert said, his voice low but firm. I care about the legacy. The benefactor's laughter filled the chamber, a sound that seemed to echo across dimensions. Then it shall be so. When the light faded, Robert was alone. The chamber was empty, the consortium gone, the insignia dark. He looked down at his hand. The ring no longer glowed, but he could feel its power coursing through him. His reflection in the polished surface of the pedestal revealed something different. His eyes, once piercing and human, now glinted faintly with the same eerie glow as the benefactor's. He returned to his office that night, the whispers now a constant hum in his mind. They no longer felt external, they were part of him. As he sat behind his desk, the Washington skyline visible through the window, he felt no fear, no doubt, only resolve. The world was his to shape, and the pact was his to command. The next morning, the headline spoke of a new directive, one that would unify the world's governments under a singular system, heralded as the next step in human evolution. Critics were silenced overnight, their voices erased from the record. The world moved forward, unaware that it was now bound to the will of a single man, a man who had become more than human. As Robert watched the sunrise from the balcony of his residence, the whispers grew louder, forming coherent words for the first time. You are eternal. You are mine. Robert smiled, his grip on the railing firm. And the world is ours.